Thank you, Kat. For those of you who may have not heard, because if you were milling around in the hallway, I'm just going to echo it out one more time. If you are on the BSidesPGH Wi-Fi, that is part of the casino. Do not port scan that. Laws are real. You will go to jail. Get onto the actual CTF network. Thank you all for coming today. First of all, quick vibe check. How many of you have ever tried to read a privacy policy? Okay. Privacy policies, okay. So we have some privacy-curious individuals here. Raise your hand if you have not actually used a product or service because of what you've seen in one of those policies. Okay, some of you have been turned off enough to say, not for me, okay? That's primarily the best way we're gonna be able to avoid some of the icky stuff that we encounter. And then last but not least, raise your hand if you feel like you actually have the means to control your digital footprint. Yeah, that's not a surprise. So who am I? Well, I started out trying to get my education. I was going to be a music education teacher. I wanted to teach high school band. I took a calculus class for my general education credit and realized that those people are my nerds, not the people with the trombones. So that's where my path sort of took a left-hand turn and went to the dark side of the sciences. I've worked a little bit as a furnace engineer, working in glass furnaces and steel furnaces. During that time, I taught myself to code because I was trying to solve some problems, and that's where I took the second left-hand turn into the world of software development. And since then, I've been working as a freelance engineer, most recently as a full-stack engineer with a marketing company. We do experiential marketing, so we build museum exhibits and different types of interactive experiences that would be on display at exhibits, something like this, right? So it's a way for brands to get their name out. We do not do like the follow you around the internet that I'm about to be talking about. When I'm not working on those types of daytime things, I am moonlighting as the CEO of Absolutely Nothing. That's not a joke. That's the name we've chosen for now. Right now there's 3 of us. We've got 2 technical developers and then 1 cat/dev wrangler who functions as our project manager and our COO. This is my 3rd time attending B-Sides and my 1st time speaking. So if you cannot hear me, feel free to like point your fingers up so that I can figure out how to hold a mic closer to my face because I'm not used to doing this. And yeah, let me know if you cannot hear me. In my free time, I listen to a lot of podcasts regarding like economics, privacy type things. I've also found something related to the federal court system, which, believe it or not, is pretty interesting right now. When I'm not doing that, I will play some video games, mostly some Fortnite and Zelda, just to kind of decompress. I do a lot of nonfiction reading, and lately I've gotten an e-bike because I sold my car. So I've been taking this thing everywhere to work, and also sometimes out on the trails in Pittsburgh. And so this is a lovely view from Frick Park. I had an awesome experience, lots of endorphins going. This is mostly a commuter bike that I'm on, so this was a bit adventurous for me, and it was a real quick lesson in that some of your highs can very quickly be some of your lows as I fell off the trail, and just a few minutes later realized I had to drag myself back up, double check I had all of my parts, make sure that my sock was not going to be completely shattered with blood. Still recovering from a little bit of this, but it's been great and I absolutely love it. Before we go on a little bit more, I just want to say, obviously, we're at a conference here. These are my beliefs and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of my employer. Again, I'm sort of in the marketing space, but we don't do the sort of icky things that I purport to be talking about here. So why did I start looking into security in the first place, right? I kind of had this meandering path. Well, honestly, it was a lot of the nation state type of hacks that were coming around and becoming public during the time when I was learning about coding. So we've got the Equifax data breach. We had about hundreds of millions of credit-related data leaked. This one was attributed to the People's Liberation Army, which is a APT out of China, we believe. The WannaCry virus, which took down a large portion of the National Health Service within the British United Kingdom. This one struck me as pretty funny because the gentleman who figured this out and air quotes sort of saved everybody was named Marcus Hutchins. And for a few days, he was lauded as a hero, and then very shortly after, the FBI connected him with some gray hat stuff and arrested him. So was a pretty tried and true example of how you got to be careful when you work in the cyber domain, just because you got to be on the up and up, and even on your best days, you sort of got to be careful. Likewise, we also had the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. This one was attributed to an Eastern European hacking group called DarkSide. And all these things, right, the SolarWinds supply chain hack, these all have started to, in my mind during this time period, be like, holy cow, this is real. This is a real ecosystem with some real problems. And the currency of all of this, almost all the time, is data. Different types of data, but data nonetheless. Most recently, we could talk about Twilio. There's been problems with OpenSSH, and I think probably one of the most recent ones we've been tracking is Snowflake, which has had consequences for Santander and Ticketmaster. So if any of you are Swifties and need yet another reason to be mad at Ticketmaster, I've just given you one. And basically talk to me on any given week, right? This stuff just keeps happening. Data keeps leaking. There's hacks, there's ransomwares. And these are all mostly on the nation state side. And along this time period, I also have this parallel track of starting to hear about data, right? That's regarding personal user information and starting to tickle the portion of my privacy, that's just not super thrilled with what I'm hearing. So one of the first bits was Cambridge Analytica, where we found that a British company was collecting and building profiles on Facebook users and then delivering targeted ads towards those users in an effort to sway political elections. That was a little bit creepy. And we have some evidence, I believe, that data was accessed from Russia. Doesn't necessarily mean it was exfiltrated, but still gets a little bit hairy there and straddles the nation-state actor. In 2017, Vizio was found to be selling minute-by-minute viewing preferences to advertisers. So whether you are actively watching something or pausing, and what that content is, was then being used to target individuals. This one, not very consensually aware of this, and so the FTC decided to fine Vizio $2.2 million. However, the real pain point there was the class action suit that paid out almost $17 million, and that amounts to basically 1 month of Netflix per user in today's dollars, I suppose. I've also seen talks about what your smart devices know and share about you. There's a wonderful talk by Kashmir Hill in the New York Times that talks about, this was a TED Talk, that addresses basically a 1 month study where every IoT device within the house was connected to Pi-hole or some other sort of routing mechanism, and they observed all of the packets. And in an entire month, there was 0 moments of digital silence, and this even included when that family left the house for a week of vacation. So you've got an empty house, and your devices are still beaconing home and transmitting data about you. And the biggest culprit here was Amazon Echo, which phoned home once every 3 minutes. No surprise there that a e-commerce company wants to know whether or not they can sell you something for any moment of the day that you may need it. It also led to some pretty weird consequences, like toothbrushes with passwords, which I think all of us is going too far down the continuum of weird and just absolutely not necessary. The reason that these toothbrushes were sending data home is because there are dental policies that would love that insurance and will actually give you discounts based on whether or not you are brushing your teeth on a regular basis, hitting the right zones, and just having good oral hygiene. It also led to some crazy dystopian phrases that you need to learn in order to properly trigger the devices, such as using the Be More brand name of a coffee maker to be able to start your coffee in the morning, which I don't know about you, but learning a phrase like that and memorizing it before I've had coffee is probably not the greatest way to go. We've also seen that through this study, there is a company called WeVibe, which makes sex toys, and decided to send telemetry back on the duration, frequency, mode, temperature settings for market research. Now, this is sort of a instance where the idea sounds great, right? Those of you who may have a long distance relationship can communicate with your partner, but unless you're into voyeurism or having surprise threesomes, maybe opt out of this one. The continuation of some weird things that have just sort of cultivated in my mind that brought to light some of these problems that we have in the personal data space specifically is there's a Life app 360, right? And this is an app that was being sold to parents to help them track the location of their children, keep an eye on them, do some parental monitoring. Sounds all well and good, right? Except for the fact that these data companies were, Life 360 was actually selling data to dozens of brokers. Location data is part of the most valuable piece of information that you can be taking on a user, because every business knows that you need to be at the right time, at the right place to make a transaction with a customer. And so to know where they are and what time they are is a great advantage to have. So This data was being sold off. And because it was going to brokers, there's essentially no transparency on who the downstream customer is for this data. So, buyer beware, sort of in that scenario. In line with sort of the toothbrush model, where we're trying to understand your habits and give you sort of a discount, there are plenty of us who use first-party data with companies like Allstate, State Farm. I think Progressive also has an offering where you can essentially put a dongle in your car and share some information with that company, and they will give you lower rates if you do not drive like me. Part of the reason I sold my car. So there is a way for you to sort of see some benefit, but in those instances, you're dealing with a first party. Right? You've opted in, you've consented to work with Progressive or whatever company that you're putting one of these dongles in the car. This is a situation where GM and Chevy were encouraging new buyers of new vehicles to turn on the inboard options to basically give you some insight onto how hard you're braking and what your gas mileage is, because that's useful enough, right? Fairly benign. However, part of that opt-in was that data could be sold to LexisNexis, one of these third-party brokers who's out there. And again, with no limitations on who that downstream purchaser is, people were finding that they were getting denied coverage because who loves data from LexisNexis? The people who need to underwrite your insurance policy. So there was individuals who were showing up to renew their auto policy, and they were finding that they had rates of 200%, 300%, 400%, or were actually being told that they were uninsurable because they didn't even realize that they had data going out there. So that may be a benefit to the rest of us that these people are off the road. However, I would argue that's still a violation of our privacy and not really a consentful sharing of data. This is probably one of my favorite ones. The Strava app, which is used for fitness tracking, right? You can map your runs, you can identify how far you've been going, and turns out you can actually find the location of army bases with this. Strava was actually using precise location to track and measure workouts in a nice, way for those of us who are doing the quantified self sort of thing. And they would plot these items on a map. Again, sounds relatively benign until you realize that you can find military bases in the middle of the desert, as well as map the halls of the Pentagon. So certainly not something that we want to be sharing willy-nilly, or at least be aware of when we are sharing out that data. So there was actually problems with this to the point where I believe individuals who work for the government were told they need to remove the app until further notice. You've seen similar calls for that with other types of social media apps. And, sort of not a new story there. And then just in general, I found this random tracker that the Health and Human Services will maintain, and you can actually go in here and check out what has happened and filter by state and pull down what types of companies have had either hacks or just general breaches or bad security policies that result in a leak of personal data. And this is a situation where I was able to find that there were over 7.4 million people affected in Pennsylvania, just adding up the stats on each one of these breaches. Now, if that is a unique person on each data hit, that would equate to over half of the people in Pennsylvania alone, which is kind of a scary thought. But I think what's even scarier is if you think that there are repeats within that data set, you've actually got fairly significant profiles that you can build on individuals regarding their health data. So this is not a problem that's going to be going away anytime soon. And I talked about the fact that location is one of the largest factors for data. In terms of the proper market, not on the dark market, this type of data is worth about $12 billion a year. So I threw up some images here, and you may or may not recognize them, and they may be too small, but it doesn't really matter because they're either going to change their name or they sort of exist behind the shadows anyway as these third parties that a lot of the services you're using end up selling your data to or sharing your data to and brokering out to whoever they shall like. There's also some good news here in that there are different websites. Privacyrights.org has got a list of data brokers, so you can begin to find some of these individuals. Sorry, not individuals. They are, fully fledged LLCs, corporations, things like that. And I think one of the greatest takeaways here, and I would definitely suggest check this one out, privacyrights.org, they do let you know which companies have opt-out mechanisms. Now, jury's out on how accurate those are and whether or not they obey them, but if you can start hitting some of those and keeping the records, you may be doing a little bit to protect yourself for future legal action if you decide to do so. I am seeing a rise in class action suits, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is a location where you might be able to find some of those brokers. Interestingly enough, some of them don't even have locations, they don't have emails, or they don't have opt-outs. So they really are existing pretty much in the shadows, and it's going to be a little bit harder to track them down. A few more just general creepy anecdotes that have come up in conversation with myself, and well, yeah, not talking to myself, but just in conversation with other people as well. Some things like, as soon as I hit 30, I started getting a lot of advertisements for erectile dysfunction, which seemed a bit premature, and also a little scary, and was like one of those moments where it's like, geez, okay, I've entered a new phase of my life, apparently. That's what I got to look forward to. It's only a matter of time before I get hair loss advertisements, I suppose. On the flip side, or sort of the other direction of the continuum for gender, my partner, who identifies as a woman, was inundated with egg freezing ads essentially the day she turned 30. So, it's I guess I can share that commisery with others, in that we're all sort of being targeted at these critical entry to market segments, right? When we hit a certain landmark, there are definitely different companies that become more and more interested in us. Speaking of unique landmarks, there are situations where people who are shopping for engagement rings have had the secret spoiled because of leaflets that show up in the mail, or different type of advertising portfolios that are shown to them during their, let's say, Netflix. Well, yeah, Netflix has ad supported now. Different types of media consumption. They get hit with different types of ads, and sort of has you looking at your partner going, "Are you shopping?" And that's sort of a little upsetting because it spoils the surprise. But there are definitely situations where this carries a lot more emotional distress. Specifically, there are instances that I found where a woman who just recently had a miscarriage ended up getting free baby products delivered to her in the mail, which I can't even imagine suffering that loss to begin with, but then to have unknown advertisers who are essentially just buying your data from these brokers, identifying that you're about to enter their market and they want to get in front of you and build that good relationship, the first taste is free, all that kind of marketing jargon, can really have a mental consequence. So, these are not just, funny incidents. They are, but some of them actually carry some real levity. And then, last but not least, every time I pause Hulu, I get ads for toilet paper, which I don't know is a coincidence or not. But actually, yeah, it probably is. I bring this up because a lot of what we feel as creepy advertisement are the targeted and retargeted attempts that are very specific to us. There's also several other branches of advertisement, but one of them is contextual, right? So just based on your location, right? You get advertisements based on where you are or the time of day, or in this case, Hulu is taking a pretty good guess that if I'm pausing whatever I'm watching, it's to get up and use the bathroom, or I often see things for Doritos or Coca-Cola products, right? Very, very reasonable types of products that you would want when you're in the middle of a binging session. So all of this is coming out, right? This is everything that I've been seeing as I'm learning to code, as I'm starting to understand how the world works, as I'm starting to learn how to sniff packets, and just understand the ecosystem that we work in, right? Everything is programmed nowadays. It's just, you can't escape it. I'm sure even this microphone has some sort of microchip in it that's running some sort of telemetry, right? Just to understand how well it's functioning, what types of loads it's under.
Actually, it inserts microchips into your hand while you're holding it.
It does, so I get a souvenir to take home. Thank you. Thank you. That's so kind of you.
I'm just checking your location right now.
Yeah, that was in my speaker agreement, wasn't it?
Yes.
Along with check in when you get here, which I did not do. I'm sorry. So apologize to anybody who was searching for me. But anyway, so I'm seeing all these things, and like, how am I feeling? I'm willing to bet it's going to echo with some of you, but I'm feeling, pretty fearful. Everybody's watching me. Surveillance capitalism is here. It is a thing. A little angry because I've sort of been removed from the equation. In the past, if a door-to-door salesman came to my front door, I had the choice on whether or not I spoke to them or told them, yeah, today's not a day. Go to somebody else. I think my neighbor would love to take a look at whatever you've got. A little bit of rage, right? Because a lot of this anger can simmer and continue to fester, but then it also moves to a sense of powerlessness, right? And in the beginning, we've all, I think, agreed unanimously and silently that we feel pretty powerless to even do something about this. And that sort of leads to apathy. And I apologize for bringing the tone of the room down a little bit, but that's how I was feeling. But in general, I'm a fairly optimistic person, and I'm very action-oriented. So sit with this for a little bit, but then it turns around, and I'm like, okay, what can I do? I want to help digital citizens reclaim ownership of their footprint. No clue how to do that, but I'm going to do something, because doing nothing seems not to be very sustainable. And if we do nothing, it's just going to continue to happen, right? And I would like to make the bad actors bleed a little. That's part of the rage and vindication portion of this. And I think most importantly, I want the next generation to start with a clean slate. I'm in my mid-30s. I've been on the internet since probably 2010, I think, is when we swapped out dial-up for something a little bit more, or sorry, not 2010, 2001. Switching my numbers there. So I know I have a long history, and there are certainly people who are older than me and younger than me in this room, and all of us, probably the cat's out of the bag. But the next generation always gets to start with a clean slate, right? The first thing you get is that birth certificate at the hospital, unless your parents have already made registries and stuff like that for you online, in which case you've already got a footprint. So with this action-oriented approach, like, what can we actually do? And, you know, in this back and forth attrition of all this privacy, what can we actually do? The bad news is we're losing right now. The Atlantic a couple years ago found out that it would take 76 working days to read all of the privacy policies that we come across each year, which clearly is not scalable. Working days is, you know, Monday to Friday, you know, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., depending on whatever your cycle is. But the point is, it's not super scalable, right? And that's almost 8 months of work time. Some of us may milk the clock here and there, but that's probably not going to go undetected if you say, hey, no, don't worry, boss, I'm just reading the privacy policies for you. I attended one of the B-Sides talk that I first attended was What We Do in the Shadows, Going Dark with Consumer Electronics by Timmy Doomsday. This caught my eye because it was like, oh, I have consumer electronics. How can I, you know, maybe not be followed everywhere on the web? And the takeaway from that was it's probably easier just to read the privacy policies. And also, if I do all of the things that I need to be secure, I'm probably never going to hear from my parents again, unless they send me something by carrier pigeon. So that also was not a, you know, very uplifting moment for me, despite being very informative. And even more recently, NordVPN found that, hey, if you just take the top 20 sites, it's still going to take you a full 9 hours to move through this. So things haven't really gotten better. And again, it's going to be near impossible to keep up, especially because we all are constantly getting these emails that say, we updated our privacy policy. It's like, great, I just finished that. Now you're giving me more homework? Like, what's going on? And we get this every day. And I have now had friends, because I've told them I'm reading privacy policies, that they now send their policies to me. So if you think your inbox sucks, imagine what mine looks like. But anyway, these are all moving targets. And then to top it off, the FTC finds that when people are actually trying to take action to, you know, make those actors bleed, they're only hitting about 9% of the actual audience that would be eligible for compensation in situations where these companies have, you know, essentially violated their privacy, either through malpractice or, in some cases, intentionally selling data to brokers or other third parties that weren't otherwise included in these privacy policy consent forms. So the activist base is really small. But there is some good news. I wouldn't leave you too far down there in the dumps. And small victory is that some companies are starting to have opt-out mechanisms. I have to think that there are individuals in the legal department who are realizing, hey, some of the chickens are coming home to roost here. Let's maybe have some liability shields here, and most people won't find these things anyway, so let's just put them in there, right? So we do have some companies that are starting to include these opt-out mechanisms. Again, the privacy, I forget what the site was, but you'll have a copy of the slides. You can find some of these opt-out forms. Europe has their GDPR framework that's been in effect for, I think, 7 years now, and it's a good start. However, that's the wrong side of the pond for where we're talking about right now. That being said, there are some really good tenets in the framework here that we're starting to see stateside in various state legislators. So the first is the right to be informed, right? The ability to actually know what types of footprints you're leaving in different places. That's obviously a really, good point, I suppose. The right to be able to access those, to be able to see, your data and understand that you can actually access it, and in some cases rectify it if it's incorrect data. This one's really important when it comes to financial data, right? For instance, we have had something like this in the US under the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau that has allowed us the access to our credit scores. And anytime an adverse effect has been taken against you, you get to know what on your credit score made you ineligible, right? So the GDPR framework extends this not only to your financial information, but also just information in general. You have the right to rectify it if it's wrong. The big one that everybody seems to remember, which is the big, nuclear button, right? The right to erasure, just forget me entirely. That's a pretty good one if you decide you're gonna take your ball and go play somewhere else. On that topic, if you decide that you don't want to be erased, there are situations in which you can opt into the restriction of your data. So you can decide, yes, you're allowed to use it, but you're not allowed to sell it to any third parties. Again, those are typically through opt-out mechanisms, but at any rate, it does exist. And then portability, right? I think this is going to happen a little bit more as we start to see federated social networks. The idea that you can take your data from one typical network to another and figure out, how you can onboard yourself there. That portability is something that's been built into the law. You also have the right to object in terms of not letting your data be used to be processed in certain ways. And an extension of that processing is actually the ability to opt out of any automated decision making. So you can say, hey, if you're not having a human in the loop on this, you can't use my data to make judgments about me, which I think is some pretty good news. And some continuing things, again, I mentioned some of the states in the US already have some GDPR-like frameworks. They're not exactly the same, but these states are up here: Colorado, Connecticut, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Oregon, Texas, Utah, and Virginia. They all have some provision that allows you some control over what you're doing on the web. And we are looking, hopefully, like we're going to get something on the federal level. The American Privacy Rights Act is 147 pages. It's got bipartisan support. When I went on vacation lately, I did take this with me, and that was what I read on the beach because I cannot sleep. I just can't stop thinking about these things. And on that topic, if you actually want to talk about that afterwards, I do have like a fact sheet here that distills some of this. It's not my fact sheet. However, it highlights some of the unique pieces about this legislation. Again, I mentioned it's got bipartisan support, so there's a Democrat on it, there's a Republican, they're starting to rally their bases. It is in draft mode, so we're still waiting for it to get going. But one of the things that I like about this that I hadn't seen in some of the GDPR statutes is that you actually have the right to file a lawsuit. So for the first time, you're actually able to seek damages in pretty significant amounts. And again, talking about the next generation who's coming in, any policy that harms minors cannot be forced into binding arbitration. So arbitration is a process it's kind of like having a judge, except the company who you're going through arbitration with will decide who that judge is, and there's no appeals process. So, your mileage may vary on that one, but the fact that you cannot subject minors to that type of arbitration, I think is a step in the right direction. And yeah, so what can we do, understanding this landscape, understanding, that we've got some rights that are coming, and in general, we're still kind of losing, but things are maybe moving in the right direction. What can we do? Well, that's where I sort of do a little self-pitch, right? Absolutely nothing. We decided to begin looking through this and try and make aggregated, understandable information for you, the consumer, right? The essential privacy labels for different types of companies. So, and we chose that name as in nothing, absolutely nothing in or out without my consent, right? For us, I'm not an absolutist. I don't want you to never share your data with anyone ever, right? We do live in a marvelous time where you can get a lot for being able to hook yourself into different ecosystems of your choosing. And so that's why consent for us is a pretty big item. So a quick plug, I've got myself working on the team. I also have our chief technical officer. We've got our chief operating officer, and like any good startup, we also have a mascot who is our chief parking officer. So she thinks that she's a Doberman, but she is a dachshund. Don't let the picture fool you. It's just zoomed in a little bit. She is all of about 12 pounds. And so what are we doing, right? How are we actually taking all of this information, these pieces of the ecosystem, and trying to distill them for you? Well, the first thing we did was we built a scraper, and we're trying to efficiently read these policies en masse, right? We're going to try and solve that problem at scale and understand like what's going on. And so right now, we're just writing blog posts about it, and we are coming out with a product soon that will be able to allow you to explore a little bit more. But I wanted to talk for a sec about some of the fun stuff we found in early scraping. So a lot of companies have a robots.txt file that says they don't want you scraping their privacy policy. Now, for those of us in the room who've done any sort of scraping, robots.txt is a suggestion. It does not mean that you have to follow it completely. However, you should be aware that there are consequences. If you are scanning that too much, you may get essentially booted from the network. They may blacklist the IP. And in certain situations, if you are scraping for intellectual property, and if you're going to try and scrape all of Facebook for all the posts and create a clone, you're clearly going to get sued, right? So that's why they say, obey what's going on in the robots.txt. However, ethically or not, we're going to do it anyway. It's a request and not a requirement, and I would politely request that you don't take my data without, informing me. So I just see it as a little bit of, that's the table stakes we're working with here. Some other fun things we found is that OpenAI is one of those companies that has a waiver form that would allow you to retain your rights to a lawsuit in the event that they use something that you did not want them to be using, and sort of get out of this binding arbitration situation. Which naturally, because that company is funded by billions of dollars and has the backing of Microsoft, that form is a Google form. I'm not kidding. Shout out to JI for finding that one. He was like, hey, guess what I found? And I was like, oh, no. And that one was actually kind of a happy day. That was a nice little pleasantry. California has a shine the light law. And I mentioned earlier that we have protections under the Financial Protection Bureau to have rights to our financial information. California has a similar shine the light law regarding privacy, where you can once a year request from a business a portable dump of your data. So if you are in California, do business in California, the next time you're there, maybe try and make a request and see, almost like when you do your credit reports, what kind of data is out there on you. That's probably going to be one of the greatest ways to see what's out there. And they call that the shine the light law, which is partially the inspiration for this talk, right? Understanding what's buried in these things. We have also found some different global privacy controls. These seem to be just headers that get attached to outgoing network requests for whatever browser you're using. No surprise, it's not in Chrome, but it is in some of the other browsers like, I believe, Brave, Firefox, and there's a few other obscure ones that I don't remember, but this link will take you to that once you've got a copy of the slides. And it's pretty funny because we've noticed that there's not just one global opt-out, there's multiple global opt-outs, which I think violates the principle of a global opt-out. And we've also found that a lot of these policies, some of them declare that they will obey that signal, but they don't tell you what signal they're following. So they just say generically, if you have an opt-out, we follow that. And it's like, okay, well, there's multiple protocols that seem to be happening here. Which one are you following? And a lot of them don't tell you. So there are browser extensions for a lot of these that you can put on. Again, that's sort of up to your own security posturing, because if it's able to alter your outgoing requests, there's the potential there for that entity to also see what you're doing. So most of these organizations are nonprofits and are called out by relatively kosher type of industry groups. So check those out. And in the next few weeks, we're actually going to be talking specifically about who has the longest and shortest policies. I think at the end of the day, we all have to get into this together, and we want to make sure that we are sort of helping each other along the way. And so I'm going to try and identify the shortest ones and easiest ones to get into. So if you're interested in this, you can definitely start checking that out. We're also going to start measuring data elements in terms of, like, if you were to come up with location or latitude, longitude, zip code, age, gender, race, all of these, right? We can all think of thousands of data points. We're going to try and get them in one spot and let you know who's calling out the most and least data points, right? These are rough proxies for us understanding the size of footprints that we might be leaving as we agree to these different privacy policies. And then also we're going to take a look at some of the easiest and hardest to digest in terms of just general reading level, right? If we find out that AWS has the reading level of a fourth grader, we're all going to be seriously upset with ourselves. And likewise, we may find that, VTech, which makes children's toys, is actually one of the hardest to read. We don't know yet, but we're running these types of explorations on what we're finding. So that's our first step, right? We're trying to build awareness. We're trying to find these things. We're trying to surface them to you. The next step is the exploration, right? We want to actually begin indexing these policies in a way that you can begin to identify commonalities, again, between these data points. Also, we're going to try and start surfacing the raw diffs. So when you get an email that says, hey, we changed our privacy policy, rather than reading what the legalese is of what they had to technically put there by law, we're just going to take you to what actually was changed from so-and-so may and to so-and-so will, right? That's a very different phrasing, and even just those small words can really pivot the way in which we view ourselves interacting with these entities. We're also going to be building a visual tool, and that's going to be a lot easier because right now, in order to figure out what policies are covering, you have to go read them, right? That's what we're doing. And so we're going to try and build a browser extension as well so that you can have sort of in-the-moment audits. And right now our working hypothesis is most of you may remember this either fondly or with terror, but this is actually a pretty good visual, right? Different types of elements are grouped based on how they have relationships to one another. And so we're going to take that and sort of flip it on its head and hopefully do that with your different data points. And so you'd be able to come to our tool, click on whatever data point is of concern to you, and figure out which policies are calling that out. So again, we are fighting a losing war, but one of the best ways to vote is to vote with your feet. So we hope that by showing you this, you'll be able to eventually decide which companies you want to continue to have a relationship with. The final step, right, is building on this periodic table of data, being able to analyze these changes as they're happening in reference with the lawsuits that are being filed. So again, if you click on something, we can tell you, hey, this company's being sued. Up to you if you want to get in on that, but we'll actually let you know if there is something to be getting in on, right? I'm a student of economics, and everything is built around incentives and disincentives. So if we can make the disincentives fairly strong and painful, I think that we're going to start seeing some, more healthy practices without even needing legal intervention. And finally, we're going to start helping digital citizens set up yet another global sharing preference, right? So the idea here is that we're going to ask you, if you were to go out on the web, what are the things that you're okay sharing with almost anyone, right? I'm okay with my zip code, right? Please don't target me any narrower than that, but I'd like to know what's going on in Pittsburgh, the greater Pittsburgh area, that's fine. So again, helping people set those individual preferences. And then the long arc of the business is, I hate to say it, but we're going to try and be a data broker. But at the end of the day, our customer is the consumer, right? So we want to put you in the driver's seat and have everything be under a system where you can give informed consent and essentially get compensated up front, either being told you're getting access to special features or in some cases being paid, right? One of the oldest business models in the world was to send coupons in your, newspaper every Sunday. So in a sense, we're doing a digital version of that. And we think that opt-in signals of yes, I'm willing to share this information is actually going to be better for the marketers in the long run. They're not going to need as much data. And the things that you have told them that you're willing to share about yourself, you're going to get stuff that is relevant to you. And then at the end of the day, we're essentially trying to help you manage this ingress, egress to your personal data. And hopefully you won't have to do it on a app-by-app basis, service-by-service basis, because as we saw, that's just unattainable. So for the roadmap, we're doing the blog scraper that's been up. We're going to launch the periodic table tool sometime this summer, the browser extension a little bit in the fall, and beginning to let people know about class actions in early January of next year. And then 2027 plus is where we're getting to that point where we're going to try and help you hook up with people who actually want to, use your data in a consentful manner. So quick FAQs that I have been asked in the past. I've been on the web for 30 years. What can I do? basically vote with your feet, right? There are things you can do like checking out have I been pwned and just maintaining good password hygiene to help yourself going forward. But a lot of these things you can't get out of. And if you want to start reading policies, what should you look for? I would honestly search for California, right? California has a lot of standards that describe how data needs to be reported. And so you can actually find a nice rubric that declares what data they're taking, why they take it, and who they're sharing it with. So that's one of the quickest things to look for in a policy. If you want to get involved, you can follow us and let us know that you'd like to help read privacy policies with us. I don't know how many drinks you need to do that, but we're still looking for the help. And, oh, sorry, last one was, how can I help elderly and non-technical people? Honestly, I love analogies, so just tell them anytime you hit the accept all on a cookie banner, you're basically just inviting a door-to-door salesman to live with you. So, you know, try to get the strictly necessary if you can, or opt out as much as possible. That's the best you can do for especially those elderly people who may understand the door-to-door salesperson analogy without understanding the inner workings of the web. So I think I am just about at time. If you'd like, you can find us at Absolutely Nothing. I put QR codes up there. That's terrible OPSEC. If you'd like, you can copy down the URLs, but they do go to the right place. It's up to you if you want to trust me or not. And I guess I'll just leave you with, there are reasons for hope. Please don't send me the privacy policies that you get, unless you have read it. If you've read it and something is interesting to you, I would love to hear from you, but don't just forward stuff onto me, please, please, please. Go ahead and subscribe to the blog to keep up to date on what we do, what we find, and yeah, I guess just, if you want to support the project, you can buy us a coffee, and we're working on various like perk levels for people who want to continue supporting. So with that, I think I'm out of time. I appreciate you all coming here today, and if you want to talk about what the framework for the American Privacy Policy Act is, I can certainly nerd out on you with this fact sheet that I've got. So thank you very much. If we've got time, I can take a few questions. Otherwise, the bar opens in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, sorry, 18, but who's counting? Yeah, I see a question over here in like a purple shirt.
So, actually kind of tying into what you just mentioned with the older people, and also, you know, now that these opt-out mechanisms are becoming more ubiquitous, is there a concern that, you know, I mean, I get text messages all the time and emails all the time where the opt-out is really just a way of validating that now my phone number is real and my email is real. So, is there a concern that, you know, I mean, that's an old dog new tricks thing, like for a while it's been just kind of allowed to ignore it, but now if we start to tell people, hey, these opt-out mechanisms exist, are they more likely to do that in the wrong sense as well?
So the question was, and if I'm not hearing you incorrectly, it sounds like you also wear a tin hat. The opt-out mechanisms are becoming more ubiquitous, and sometimes we're even getting them in text messages. So what's to say that these agencies aren't just using that as a way to actually confirm they've got the right person? You bring up a valid point, right? There's a certain level of trust that we have to take when we're navigating the internet. I suppose I personally would not opt out of anything that comes via text message. I would look to the source, right? In the same way that if you get a phishing message, one of the best ways to make sure that you're not being phished is to look up the real information from the real site. And you'd have to go with a grain of trust that what you find on the website is as close as you can get to an authentic opt-out. Yeah, so that being said, I personally probably wouldn't do the text message version ones. I would just, you know, put those on my block list. Unfortunately, again, it goes back to we're kind of losing sometimes. Cool, any other questions? I'm not seeing, maybe? No, that was a stretch, okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Feel free to find me.